everyone, and welcome again to another edition of the Philly Factor. And what a special edition of the show that we have today. My next guest is a Delaware County resident, but more importantly, he's a Vietnam veteran. Ralph Galati joins us. Ralph has quite the interesting story. And first of all, let me tell the folks a little bit about you, Ralph. You are a U.S. Air Force veteran. You were shot down in your F-4 Phantom jet during the Vietnam War. You became a prisoner of war in 1972, and you have the distinction of being the second youngest POW on record for that war. Ralph joins us to talk about where he is in life right now and what he is doing to help other veterans of the Vietnam War. And Ralph, I want to thank you for your time, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our great country.
Well, I appreciate that. It was a great honor to serve. Thank you.
And right before the interview, Ralph had said that, I could ask him anything that I like, and which is very much appreciated, because I think, Ralph, you would agree that there are many men and women who have not only served in the Vietnam War, but in subsequent wars around the world, that have put on the uniform of the United States Army, the United States military, who have a very difficult time discussing what they went through. And I know that is sort of your life mission now, to help these men and women come to grips with what they went through and making sure that they're getting everything that they deserve from this great country of ours.
That's very true. And, I'm blessed in that I try to represent not just the POW story, but Vietnam veterans and veterans in general. So it's good for me to talk about it. It is not good for a lot of folks too. So maybe somebody that hears or sees this interview might take some action. And sometimes it's just one veteran a day or one veteran at a time that we could try to help. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Let's go back in time, if we can, Ralph, and talk about where you were in the 1970s, early 1970s, when you get drafted to serve in the Vietnam War. Just reflect a little bit back to what that time was like. I mean, I'm a few years younger than you, but did not have to register for the draft. I graduated high school in '75, and by that time, I think the tide had turned with the Vietnam War, so I never had to register for the draft. But in your case, you and so many other men had to register for the draft.
Right. Yeah. I always find it interesting that all young people like you feel compelled to tell me how young you are. So I appreciate it. Yeah, I was in high school in '66. I went to St. Joe's, graduated in '70, and I was commissioned. So I wasn't drafted. I was commissioned through ROTC into the Air Force in 1970. And the same day that I graduated, I went on active duty to flight school. So that was it. It was an interesting time. 1970, matter of fact, in my college yearbook, aside from our name and our major, was our draft lottery number. So
Wow.
it was an interesting time, 1969, 70. But anyway, I went to flight school, did really well, went to F-4 school, did really well. And then I knew that was going to be a pipeline to Vietnam. And by 1971, October or so, when I got to Southeast Asia, the war was starting to wind down. I mean, we were having troop withdrawals. If you remember, in 1968 or so, we had over 500,000 troops in Southeast Asia. And by the end of 1971, 72, it was probably 125,000. So, the end seemed to be near, although when I got shot down in February of '72, we had just now started to bomb again in North Vietnam. There was a ceasefire since '68. So on one hand, it looked like it was going to be over, and the other hand said it's starting up again, at least the air war.
Let's go back to that day when you're shot down. And again, as I said at the beginning, some people would have a difficult time reflecting or recollecting what that day was for you. So can you tell us what happened and what goes through your mind when all the training in the world, even though they prepare you, I guess it really doesn't prepare you when your aircraft is shot and you're now crashing to the ground.
It's surprising how the training does kick in. So I was on my 69th combat mission, so I was there just about 90 days. And we found out that morning that our mission was going to be over North Vietnam, which really there had not been any basically since 1968. So it was a real wake-up call. My pilot was Bill Schwartfeger. We had not flown together ever. So it was new for him and new for me, although he was on his second tour and I was still relatively new. Our mission was as a forward air controller, which was going out, finding targets and directing bombing missions into that. And it was the F-4, two-seat jet fighter. I mean, it was a kick. I got to admit, it was great, flying fast and low. And we were doing our thing for a couple of hours. We were finding targets, directing in the aircraft, going out and getting refueled because you have limited time in a fighter. We probably did that 2 or 3 times. So we were over target over 2 hours.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, all the anti-aircraft radar, which was SAM, surface to air missile batteries, activated. And in your dashboard, you could see where it's coming from. But in our case, it was like 360 degrees.
Hmm.
So we saw a couple launch. We were turning into to hit the radar site, and that's when we heard this big thump in the back of the aircraft, which is never a good thing.
Yeah.
We noticed that all the warning lights went on, all the red lights went on. You don't want to ever see red lights. Engine RPM went to zero. Hydraulics was zero. I mean, everything was zero. The aircraft was still sort of flying, but it was incapacitated.
Hmm.
And that's when you mentioned, that's when your training kicks in because we just did stuff by pure rote memory, just following checklists in our head as we were trained to do. Interesting anecdote later if you remind me about the Mayday call. But the one thing we had to do because we were flying very low, which is not normal, but we were flying maybe 3,500 feet, so that did not give you a lot of room for error. My pilot Bill got the aircraft in an attitude that enabled a successful ejection. Pulled the ejection handles, boom, out we go. And we were so low to the ground we couldn't find a place to safely land. That area of North Vietnam was farmland as opposed to jungles in South Vietnam. So
Sure.
we were wide open and very exposed. But it was 15 minutes or so from the time we took the hit until ejection, parachuting down, landing in a village, getting beat up and surviving. That was 15 minutes. I mean, it
Hmm.
happened really quickly. And it's amazing how, the years of training really kick in. And a couple of months later, when Bill and I got reunited, one thing we regretted was not making a Mayday call. And yet we found out months later from somebody else that was on the mission that we both made Mayday calls. So I think we just did things automatically, not even realize we had done them. And it probably saved our lives.
When all this is going on and you sort of go into this survival mode, I mean, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing here.
Right.
Um, I'll ask the question. It may seem rude or may seem ignorant, but I mean, in the back of your mind, are you thinking, "This is it"? We're going down, and you
Well,
start saying your Hail Marys and your Our Fathers at
you
that
know,
point.
it's it's funny, sort of. Um, Prior to that, I envisioned everything that could ever happen to me that day, and it did. The only thing I could never imagine was being killed in combat. It
Hmm.
just I don't know if I refused or just willed it to happen, but I envisioned everything. So when it did happen, it wasn't like I was shocked, but I knew what to do. And it's still traumatic, it's still debilitating. You have physical issues, you got emotional issues, all your survival instincts kick in. You have a little bit of training, but reality is a little bit different than training.
Yeah. Hmm.
And at that point, it was just your survival instincts. Don't get shot, make a successful parachute landing, don't break any bones, try to keep from getting killed on the ground, and then after that, it was kind of being the best POW you could be in captivity.
Wow. That's sort of funny to hear. Try to be the best POW you could be while being held captive.
Yeah.
But so when the Vietnamese capture you, I mean, I'm sure they're not embracing you and saying, "Welcome to North Vietnam." It had to be a brutal,
Oh
horrendous
yeah.
experience.
It was nasty. It was during Tet, which is their big Lunar New Year. We've been bombing the area. Our plane crashed in the, kind of in the town, and now two aliens from outer space are floating down into their village. And you could imagine what it's like to, be in the receiving end of bombs, and then your plane crashes, and they literally tried to kill us,
Mm,
and a village worth of people. And the only reason we survived was we think a militia guy or reservist or military guy was in the area and probably had enough savvy or orders that said, I think if I get these aliens to Hanoi, I could get a promotion or a reward. And that's the only reason he probably pulled us to safety. And 24 hours later, we're now in what ended up being the Hanoi Hilton. But, because we were in the southernmost part of North Vietnam when we were shot down just across the demilitarized zone from South Vietnam. So it was a long trek by Jeep through an area that Americans were still bombing. So I was more worried that we were going to get killed by Americans than by Vietnamese.
do they tie your wrists, your ankles? They put a blindfold on you? I
Yeah,
mean,
all the above. Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
they let us out, to go to the bathroom, and they gave us what looked like a hockey puck of rice and fish, just enough, and then we spent the night. I don't even know where we spent the night, probably some outpost somewhere.
mhm,
And I mean, they basically kept us alive because that's what their mission was. And basically, if you get us, keep them alive till you get to Hanoi, and then let the Hanoi guys take care of you after that. So it was interesting. We tried to communicate with each other, me and Bill. It was hard. Sometimes we had masks on or had things over our head. Um, and it gave us time to think once your body realized where you were and what you were doing, that, you were in a different place. And now instead of being a combat aviator, we were now, prisoners, and we were now bound by the code of conduct, which kind of set our behavior on what to do if you're ever captured or a prisoner of war. So we had to reorient ourselves to uh, a life or a period of resistance as opposed to combat.
mm. You talk about this code of conduct, but I mean, you know, did the Vietnamese abide by that code of conduct, or did they not have a code of conduct? They knew they had two Americans, and of course they're bringing you to this location, which becomes known as the Hanoi Hilton, and you find yourself with other Americans that are being held captive by the Vietnamese.
Yeah, well, first of all, the answer to your question is no, they are not bound or accept the code of conduct. They don't even accept the Geneva Convention. So
Hmm,
they basically said, you're a war criminal because there's not been a pronounced war, so we don't have to follow the rules of engagement. Um, so my first 75 days were either in isolation or solitary. So, I really didn't have anybody else to rely on. It was just me. And I was young, I was naive, I was inexperienced, I was stupid, I mean, I was scared. I mean,
hmm,
I had really nothing going for me other than trying to follow the code of conduct, which is, name, rank, serial number, date of birth, and you will not accept parole or special favors. If senior, you will take charge. Well, I was in charge of me. I certainly wasn't senior.
right.
You make every attempt to escape, keep goodwill with your fellow POWs. It sounds pretty easy to do, but it's hard when you're by yourself. And
Hmm,
that's where I found myself for the first, you know, for the first 75 days. So and then my roommate was Bill. They fortunately we put us together again, and we finally got to know who the hell we were. I mean, we
yeah.
had no experience with each other other than flying out of the same base. So you really find out what you're made of. You try to battle your demons. There's a lot of guilt going on. I should never have been shot down. But I mean, I wasted an asset. I wasted all this training. Guilt is it's a tough one to deal with. And then the guilt maybe of, did I handle myself in an interrogation properly? Did I behave? If you're not on your A game, which when you're beat or you're starved or you're sleep deprived and food deprived, you're never on your A game.
Hmm,
And you got to really be careful that you don't, acknowledge anything that you shouldn't acknowledge. So
hmm.
that was the toughest time, was that the first 6 to 8 weeks.
So I'm guessing that you had to have hope that that you were going to get released. I guess you're feeling that this can't be how it all ends. That you're hoping that they realize that you've been taken prisoner of war. But I guess you have to have tremendous hope that this situation that you're in is going to get resolved and you're going to be able to get home and see your family and friends again.
Yeah. Well, hope is all you had. And until you had roommates and you communicated with other POWs to get kind of a source of strength and how to behave and how to survive and how to resist, all you had was faith and hope.
Mm.
And the old expression, there's no atheists in foxholes, is true. I mean, you prayed every day.
Mhm.
And you paid for survival, you prayed for strength, you paid for, just to be left alone sometimes. So
Mm.
but like I said, we were encouraged a little bit because we kind of knew it was going to be the end of the war. We just didn't know when. We didn't know if it was 1972 or 73 or 70, sorry, 75. Um, but but the one thing we really had to do, what motivated us the most, was to be sure that we did not disrespect or dishonor the long captivity of the POWs that were there from 64 through 68, the guys that preceded us.
Sure.
And we thought that would be the grossest indignity for us not to do our best because they went through hell for years.
Mhm.
I'm there for months. So, and then you couple that with 58,000 plus that died and injured and served. There was a lot of motivators to make sure we did our job.
Yeah. Um, does it does it hurt to talk about this? Maybe hurt isn't the right word, but again, because as we said at the beginning, a lot of guys and women and their families sort of bury these feelings deep down
Yeah.
inside, never to address them again. But
Yeah.
you've decided to tell your story. I mean,
Yeah.
but is there was there ever any reluctance on your part to tell your story?
No, not reluctance. When I got back, I just tried to be an Air Force officer again in flight school, and if somebody found out about me, fine. And if they didn't, it's not like I wore it on my sleeve. But I didn't conceal it either.
Sure.
And when I left the Air Force after 8 years and went to work in business, mostly IBM, a couple people would know my background, but at that point I was just, an average citizen. I was just a business guy. And I never concealed it. I just didn't profess it. But if somebody asked me to speak, I always felt that, and even to this day now, 50 some years later, like today,
Hmm.
if people are still curious and still interested, um, not selfishly, like I said, it helps me to talk about it, but I owe it to them to represent not just the POW story, but also talk about missing in action and Vietnam veterans in general, those that served with honor, treated like crap when they got home, but they served
Sure.
honorably. Uh, that's a good motivation for me. And I'm still in awe that the POW flag and things like that are still flying after all these years. And as bad as it was in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, it is quite remarkable.
Yeah. Did you ever go back? I mean,
No.
yeah, I
Yeah,
because kiddingly, I see on television,
I know.
on these game shows, you've won a trip to Vietnam,
I
and I'm
know.
thinking, 50 years ago, no one would ever want to step foot in Vietnam, whether
Yeah.
intentionally or unintentionally.
It is
But
an interesting tourist attraction. I've got a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
POWs that have gone back for whatever reasons, but I have no trauma to go back. I just find that there's probably a couple thousand other places I'd rather go first. That's all.
good for you. Good for you. You've made it your life's mission now, as I've said before, to help other military men and women and their families, most notably the Vietnam era veterans. And you were just in the Veterans Day parade here in Philadelphia, honored for your contributions to our great country. But even when we talked back in the summer about doing this interview, you said, um, you just, if you reach one person and help
Yeah,
one person out of doing this interview
yeah,
and many of the other things that you've done over the last few weeks and years, then you feel like you've accomplished something, and that's important to you.
yeah. And sometimes you see the fruits of your labor. So I'll get a phone call from a veteran or a Vietnam veteran. They could be in their 70s or 80s, just starting to get their benefits. They were probably prodded by their spouse or their kids or somebody. Try to get into the system, get your meds taken care of, or your hearing aids, or get mental health treatment, whatever it happens to be, disability benefits.
Mhm.
But then sometimes somebody might hear my story and might take action on their own. I'll never know it.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that somebody in the sound of my voice might do something because of it. And I really am very um, focused, especially on the families. So the spouses and the families, because they will encourage their veteran to take action more than the veteran will on their own. Uh, so there's still a lot of baggage that some of them carry, and even the Middle East guys, post 9/11 vets that are kind of getting into their 40s and 50s now. You come back and like I did, you say you're okay, but you are not okay. You're different. You might
Mm.
feel okay, but you are not the same. And it's really important that you excise those demons, whatever they are in there. And that's what we're trying to do is just get them to take some action on their behalf.
Yeah, just as an observer, it seems like finally the Vietnam veterans in particular, who were so long forgotten.
Yeah.
I mean, there were no parades when they came
No.
home. There was no ceremonies at City Hall or at the courthouse or whatever. But it seems like now they're finally getting their just desserts 50 years after the fact,
Yeah.
but they are getting the recognition that
Yeah.
they rightfully
And I'll
deserve.
tell you, there's a coin, a challenge coin that they give out sometimes, and it has been the mission of Vietnam vets, or the Vietnam Veterans of America, but Vietnam vets in specific, that they refuse to allow a veteran to come home and be abandoned or ignored, and because they know what it's like. And
Hmm.
so if you go to airports and events and things like that, the people you see there are the motorcycle riders, the Vietnam vets. They're the ones that are at every event, every cemetery, every welcome home to ensure that today's troops are not treated like they were. And I find that really remarkable.
Sure.
It's probably therapeutic as well. So,
Yeah. What can we do? I mean, it's great to know that there are people like you that are sort of spearheading all these movements on so many different levels, not just on the local level, but state and federal. But what can the average Joe and Jane do? I mean, I always make it a point that if I see a veteran, whether it's Memorial Day or it's Fourth of July or whatever, to thank them for
yeah.
their service. And I know that means a lot to them. But
Yeah.
what else could we do to thank them for their service?
Well, if you know you have a veteran in your family or a neighbor or your church or your soccer team or whatever, ask them about their service and ask them if they're getting benefits. And if they're not, they just smack them across the head and tell them, they'll drive them somewhere. Make sure they do it. Talk to their families and make sure they are getting every benefit they are eligible for and deserve, but also treatment that they might have left unattended. I mean, anything else? There are plenty of veterans organizations and groups. I'm on the board of the Delaware County Veteran Memorial. We do a lot of education programs for schools. We do flag ceremonies for families. We host some events there throughout the year. You could participate in that. Volunteerism is great and appreciated. We have toy drives. There's Toys for Tots we do at the Marine Corps League. There are no excuses anymore. If you want to do something for veterans, there are plenty of outlets for you to do it. Every county in Pennsylvania by law has an Office of Veteran Services. So Delaware County has one in Media. It's staffed to do everything that I just talked about. So really are no excuses for anybody to not reach out and get benefits and treatment. So I think the best thing you could do is just, like you said, thank them for their service, but then ask the next question, are you getting your benefits?
Yeah.
And encourage them to do so.
That's very important. Do you think there'll ever come a time when those flags that are flying outside of our post offices and our government buildings and schools and churches, will there ever be a day that those flags will come down because every prisoner of war, those missing in action, have been fully accounted for.
I'd like to say yes, but there are still, since World War II, there are still more than 81,000 missing since World War II, 81,000. So that's 81,000 families that are still waiting for an accounting. Sadly, about half of those were lost at sea. And so that's going to be a difficult find for
Sure.
families to get that closure. But the mere fact that, 50 some years later, the flag is still flying and what it represents, basically saying your government will not forget or abandon you, is a good signal to the average citizen that we will take care of our own. So, in one sense, I'd like to see it keep flying because it's a great message.
Yeah, absolutely. One final question before we go, and Ralph, we could go on for another hour, but
Sure.
what
I'm
was it like?
retired. I got plenty of time.
I hear you. What was it like to be the Grand Marshal of the Veterans Day Parade, going down Market Street and seeing all those people on Market Street?
I tell you, it was really, really good. It was my first parade since 1973, and I've avoided them because it was so uncomfortable for me to get a parade and be welcomed home when 3 million were not. Just like you said, they were
Right.
treated very toxic. But Philly's my hometown, and people convinced me. They said, "Look, you keep saying you want to help one veteran. If you march in the parade, you never know who you're going to see, who you can
Sure.
help." And I did it for that. The weather was great, the crowds were great, the folks in the parade, the thousands in the parade, the organizations, everything was great. Like I said, if we touched a couple, and maybe got them benefits, or God forbid, help one person not commit suicide,
Yeah.
then I'd say mission accomplished.
Yeah.
So in that regard, it was a very worthwhile day.
Well, Ralph, I want to again thank you for your service. Thank you for what you're doing now because it's such
Sure.
important work. And this has been great. I really appreciate your time telling your story. And hopefully, even through this program, if we're able to help veterans out there or veterans' families,
Right.
then you've again have accomplished your mission,
Right.
and we've helped you facilitate that mission of yours.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Ralph Galati joining us here on this edition of the Philly Factor. Until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us. We'll catch you next time around on the Philly Factor.